The D-1 howitzer M1943 is a Soviet World War II-era 152.4 mm howitzer. The gun was developed by the Design Bureau headed by F.F.Petrov in 1942 and 1943, based on the carriage of the 122 mm howitzer M1938 and using the barrel of the 152 mm howitzer M1938. The powerful and mobile D-1, with its wide range of ammunition, significantly increased the firepower and breakthrough abilities of Red Army tank and motor rifle formations. Several hundred D-1s were manufactured before the end of World War II. Post-World War II, the D-1 saw combat in numerous conflicts during the mid to late 20th century. The long operational history of D-1 howitzers in national armies of numerous countries is a testimony to its qualities. The gun still remains in service in a number of post-Soviet states and some other countries. The D-1 is widely considered a valuable element of Soviet artillery development and production. Background: in 1941 the Soviet Union decided to cease production of the 152 mm howitzer M1938. One of the reasons was the disbanding of the Rifle Corps between August and September 1941 and the consequent removal of the Corps artillery. Moreover, all 152 mm howitzers were excluded from divisional artillery. As a result, there was no series production of 152 mm howitzers during 1942. However, the Rifle Corps were re-established in late 1942 and the previous organization of artillery at the Corps level was reintroduced. As a result of the halting of 152 mm howitzer production, the Red Army Corps artillery lacked a weapon more mobile than the heavy 152 mm howitzer gun M1937, but more powerful than the 122 mm howitzer M1938. Response to the challenge. In 1942, trying to solve the problem of lack of a suitable mobile 152 mm howitzer, the Design Bureau headed by F.F.Petrov started to work privately on a new howitzer based on the carriage of the M30 and the barrel of the M10. The approach allowed production to begin on the new howitzer almost immediately from the stockpile of parts for both earlier guns. Given the war situation and shortages of artillery, this solution was both elegant and expedient. Early in 1943, Petrov notified the People's Commissar of Armaments Dmitry Ustinov about the new project. On 13 April, Ustinov informed Petrov that the State Committee of Defense had requested for 5 of the new guns to be sent to the testing grounds on 1 May. On 5 May, 2 pieces were received for trials. 2 days later, on 7 May, the gun was recommended for adoption, and on 8 August 1943 it was officially adopted as the 152 mm howitzer M1943. 1.5 months later, the first series production D-1 howitzers were delivered to the Red Army representatives. Production: the D-1 was manufactured solely at No. 9 plant in Sverdlovsk from late 1943 to 1949. During World War II, the howitzer was only produced in small numbers because Plant No. 9 was also responsible for the mass production of the 122 mm howitzer M30. This resulted in critical shortages of the 152 mm howitzers in the Red Army Corps artillery until the end of the war. Description: the D-1 howitzer was essentially a combination of the barrel of the 152 mm howitzer model 1938 on the carriage of the 122 mm howitzer M1938. Since the new carriage was lighter than that of of the M10. The barrel was fitted with a massive double-baffle muzzle brake DT3 to soften the shock of recoil. The breech block was of interrupted screw type. A recoil system consisted of a hydraulic buffer and a hydro-pneumatic recuperator. The separately loaded ammunition included a variety of shells and 8 different propellant charges in cartridges. The carriage was nearly identical to the carriage of the M30. It had suspension and steel wheels with pneumatic rubber tires. The trails were initially of riveted construction, but were eventually replaced in production by welded ones. Late production pieces were equipped with caster wheels to ease manhandling. Time to set up for combat was about 2 minutes. In an emergency it was possible to fire without splitting trails, however this was at the price of a drastically reduced traverse. Since the gun was not equipped with a limber, it could be towed only by vehicle. The maximum towing speed was 40 km/h on paved roads, 30 km/h on cobbled roads and 10 km/h off-road. To give the crew some protection from bullets and shell fragments, the gun was fitted with a shield. Comparison with contemporary howitzers. From a technical and tactical point of view, the D-1 project provided the Red Army Corps artillery with a modern 152 mm howitzer, which combined both good mobility and firepower. When compared with a typical contemporary howitzer of similar caliber, the D-1 had shorter range, but was much lighter. For example, the German 15 cm F.F.Petrov had a range of 13,325 meters, about 1 kilometer longer than that of the D-1, but also weighed almost 2 tons more. The same can be said of the US 155 mm howitzer M1 of the 149 mm howitzer manufactured by the Italian Ansaldo, a German howitzer with characteristics similar to those of the D-1. The 15 cm SFH-36 did not reach mass production. Compared with older pieces such as the French Schneider model 1917, the D-1 had the advantage in both weight and range. Organization and employment. The D-1 was employed by Corps artillery and the reserve of the main command units. In 1944, the Rifle Corps of the Red Army had 1 artillery regiment each. Those regiments consisted of 5 batteries, equipped with the D-1 along with various other 152 mm howitzers, 122 mm gun M1941, 37, 152 mm howitzer gun M1937, a 107 mm gun M1910, 30. Reserve of the main command included howitzer regiments and heavy howitzer brigades. Those could be merged to form artillery divisions. The Red Army employed D-1 howitzers from 1944 onwards, during the final stages of World War II. The D-1 was primarily used against personnel, fortifications and key structures in the enemy rear. The anti-concrete G530 shell was also sometimes used against armored vehicles with good results. During its service, the gun earned a reputation for being reliable and accurate. The D-1 was finally withdrawn from service in the mid-70s. After the war, the gun was supplied to many countries around the globe, including former Warsaw Pact allies, such as Poland. As of the early 2000s, it remains in service in Afghanistan, Albania, China, Cuba, Hungary, Iraq, Mozambique, Syria, Vietnam and other countries. The gun was employed in the Arab-Israeli conflict and also also in some conflicts in former republics of Soviet Union. The long operational history of D-1 howitzers in the national armies of numerous countries is an additional testimony to its qualities. The D-1 was seen in use during the April 2016 battles between the Nagorno-Karabakh Defense Army and the Azerbaijani forces. It was used by the NKR Defense Forces. Surviving D-1 howitzers can be seen in various military museums and war memorials, e.g., in the Museum of Artillery and Engineering Forces, St. Petersburg, Russia, in the Museum of Heroic Defense and Liberation of Sevastopol on Sapun Mountain, Sevastopol, in the Museum of the Great Patriotic War, Kiev, Ukraine, in Poznan Citadel, Poland, and in Polotsk, Belarus, as a memorial piece. Variants. In addition to the towed howitzer, Petrov's team developed a vehicle-mounted variant of the D-1. Red Army offensive operations in the summer and fall of 1943 reawakened interest in the idea of a heavy artillery tank similar to the KV-2, that could provide close fire support to rifle and tank units and would be capable of demolishing heavy fortifications. Probable causes for the development of such a vehicle were the cessation of mass production of the Su-122 medium assault gun and a version of Su-152 heavy assault guns for anti-tank actions. The tank variant of the D-1 was originally intended for mounting in a variant of the KV-1's heavy tank. It utilized the mount of the 85mm D5, leading to the unofficial name D-1-5 and eventually to the official designation of D-15. Only one example was built. There is no information about the gun being mounted in the KV tank. By October 1943, Soviet authorities were anticipating the start of mass production of the powerful Is-2 heavy tank. As a result, the idea of a specialized artillery tank based on the obsolete KV chassis was dropped. Another project combining the T-34 tank chassis with the D-15 gun was also considered. Designated Su-D-15, the medium assault gun was intended as a replacement for the Su-122. Although the project received a lot of support from the authorities, it never entered production, both because of its shortcomings and because it was made redundant by the Su-152. However, lessons learned mounting a powerful gun in the T-34 allowed for rapid development of the Su-100 tank destroyer ammunition. The D-1 had a large variety of ammunition, including high-explosive, armor-piercing, heat, shrapnel, illumination, and chemical. The D-1 used separate loading ammunition, with 8 different charges. The charges included the full-charge ZH-536 and smaller charges ranging from the 1st to 6th, which was the smallest. A special charge was used with the BP-540 heat projectile. Propellant charges were produced in full and third variants in munitions factories. All other charges were derived from them by removing small gunpowder bags from the charge cartridge. For flash suppression, there was a special chemical mixture which was to be inserted into a cartridge before night firing. 152mm projectiles for the D-1 weighed about 40 kilograms, a difficult job for the loaders, who had to carry the projectiles alone. When set to fragmentation mode, the F.F.Petrov projectile produced fragments which covered an area 70 meters wide and 30 meters deep. When set to high explosive action, the exploding shell produced a crater about 3.5 meters in diameter and about 1.2 meters deep. Despite the D-1's withdrawal from service in the mid-1970s, the F.F.Petrov is still fired from modern 152mm ordnance pieces of the Russian Army. The G530 HEAC anti-concrete shell had a muzzle velocity of 457 meters per second when fired with the first charge. At a range of 1 kilometer, it had a 358 meters per second terminal velocity and was able to punch through up to 80 centimeters of reinforced concrete before detonating a TNT charge, which increased the total penetration to 114 centimeters. The G530 could not be fired with a full charge without putting the crew at risk of having the shell explode in the barrel. A special version of the shell, the G530SH, was developed to allow use with the full charge. The BP540 heat projectile was not used during World War II. It had an armor penetration of 250 mm at an incident angle of 90 degrees, 220 mm at 60 degrees, 120 mm at 30 degrees. In the late 1950s, old ammunition stocks for the D-1 were removed from the Soviet inventory. The only shells retained were the F.F.Petrov, O530, G530, G530SH, and possibly chemical shells.